Now let's add the railings at the top of our tower. So here onto the primitive split, let's add a connectivity sub and connect the primitive split node into the connectivity node, and let's change the connectivity type to primitive. So if we middle click, we have the attribute called class. So if we go into the geometry spreadsheet and into the primitive attribute, so here we have the class that goes 0 to 13. So let's isolate the very top ring of our tower. Okay, so we note that the very top of our tower ring is the 13, so because that is the maximum number in here at the class attribute. Okay, so let's isolate that. So, and we want to procedurally isolate that because when we change our height segment, so let's say if I increase my height segments, and now if I go into the geometry spreadsheet, and now as you can see we have the 25 individual these primitives and the highest value is the 25. Okay, so let's find a way to procedurally select the very top of our ring. So let's add an attribute promote and connect that, and here onto the attribute promote, so the original class is the primitive. Let's change here on the original name, let's select our class attribute and let's promote this onto the detail level. So now if we go into the geometry spreadsheet, so at the primitive level, now we don't have the class attribute, so instead it is promoted onto the detail level, and we have the class attribute and it is set to 13, and because the promotion method is set to average, so let's change this to maximum. So now we are using the maximum number from the connectivity attribute and setting it onto the detail attribute. So let's add another attribute promote because we want this attribute to be onto the primitive level and not on to the detail level. Okay, so let's add an attribute promote and let's connect that, and here onto this attribute promote our original class is the detail, so let's select the class attribute and let's promote it back to the primitive. So now onto the primitive, you see we have the value of 25. Okay, and here onto this attribute promote sub, so here it says the delete original, so we are deleting the original geometry. So but we do need the original class attribute to compare. Okay, so here we have the class attribute, and onto the primitive level, so when we promoted our attribute onto the detail, so let's change its name. So now let's call this one to max. So now if we go into the geometry spreadsheet and onto the detail, so now this attribute is called max. Okay, so here onto the attribute promote, and let's select the remove the class and select the max attribute instead, and this time let's check the delete original because we don't need the max attribute onto the detail level. So now we have the attribute called class and a max, and we also have the name attribute from this primitive split section. Okay, so we will clean these attribute later. So now let's add a group expression node, and let's connect the group expression, and here onto the group expression let's name our group to be top ring, and let's use the vex expression. So here we have the attribute name class and a max, So we can say add class. So at the rate of sign and type the attribute name CLASS class. So if this attribute is equal to at the rate of max, okay, and now the group expression node is throwing an error, and that is because the group name is not correct, so the spaces are not allowed. So let's remove the space and let's add an underscore top underscore ring. So now as you can see, the group expression node is now working correctly. So what we are doing, so we have for the every primitive we have the class attribute. So if we go into the geometry spreadsheet and onto the primitive, so we have the class that is goes 0 to 25, okay, and we are promoting this attribute onto the detail to calculate the maximum value. Okay, so here we have the max, which is go to 25, and in the group expression node we are comparing these two attributes. So we are saying that at every primitive, so the every primitive has the class attribute, and if the current primitive has the attribute which is equal to the max, which means the 25, so we want these primitive to be in the top ring group. Okay, so now if we go back onto the line and change the number of points, so we will be selecting our top ring group correctly. Okay, so after the, let's isolate our top group. Let's add a blast node, and onto the blast node let's select our height rings group and choose the delete non-selected to isolate our, not the height rings group but the top ring group. So this is the group that we are interested in. Okay, and now let's select the very top edge of our this group. So let's add a group node and let's disable the base group and go into the include by edges. Let's enable that, and let's enable our max edge angle. Let's enable that, and the group type, let's change this to edges, and let's add the angle to 90 degree. So here as you can see, we are now selecting these inside rings. Okay, we can click on the edge angle uses between edges. So now we are selecting the top as well as the ring. So let's uncheck that and let's duplicate this group node. Let's connect it here, and in this node let's enable our edge angle. Okay, so let's rename this group to rings and this group to be rings with top edge. Okay, so basically we have two groups, two edge group. We have the rings group and we have the rings with the top edges. Okay, so let's add a group combine to add the boolean operation to these groups. Okay, so we can use the group combine node to create the boolean operation for the groups. Let's connect that, and here onto the group combine let's name this group to be top edge. So now this is the name of the group and this is equal to the rings with the top edges. Okay, and now let's subtract these inner rings because we don't want them. So let's add a subtraction and let's subtract with the inner rings. Okay, so now we are subtracting these inner rings and we have selected the very top edge. Okay, and let's add a poly extrude node to extrude our top edge, and here onto the group, let's select our top edge group. Let's increase its distance. Okay, and now let's delete all of these side faces. So here onto the poly extrude node, let's enable our side group. So we have the extrude side group. So if you middle click, now we have the extrude side group. Okay, so let's delete that, adding in a blast node, and onto the blast, let's select our extrude side group. So now we have the very top extruded faces, and now let's add a polybar to convert these edges into railings. Let's set the display flag onto the polybar, and let's decrease its wire radius, and also add some divisions for more smoother railings. And here onto the poly extrude node, we can add the divisions. So here, as you can see, the divisions are not working, and I think that is because we have made mistake into the blast node. So we are basically deleting these new faces that the poly extrude node has created. So into the blast node, let's click delete non-selected to isolate the top of our faces. Okay, so now here, as you can see, we have these divisions. So if we set the display flag onto the polybar, and here, as you can see, we have these railings. So let's decrease the wire radius down. Okay, let's add a 3 railing lines, and let's add another null at the end, and let's call this one railings, and let's merge it with our chimney. So maybe chimney is not correct name. Let's call this one tower. Okay, and let's merge both of these geometries. So here we have the tower and the railings. So if we go back onto the line and adjust its length or these height segments, we will have a perfectly working setup. Okay, so in the next lesson, let's create the base for our tower. Okay, so let's do that in the next lesson.